The purpose of this podcast is to focus on recovery from life situations, be it a disease, chronic or acute, perhaps the loss of someone so dear to you in death, or a change of life patterns that has affected you so profoundly that you have no choice but to find your new normal and become focused on moving forward. Each episode is designed to show the positivity that people bring to each and every one of their stories, the successes they've had, ways that they have become so definitively focused on moving forward. We look forward to sharing their stories, and we hope that they inspire you just as much as they have inspired us. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Friday night live edition of Focused on Forward. I was enjoying my conversation with my guest tonight so much that we were almost late to start this. Kind of recognized that we got about 5 or 6 seconds left, and I'm like, we got to go. So anyway, very excited to have Kate Wallinga with us tonight, and we're going to have a really nice conversation with her. I'm looking forward to hearing about she broke her back in 2014. We're going to talk about that, how she overcame that, and really how she's moved forward in life with that back injury and what she's doing now to kind of help herself out. And then we're going to talk about, as the title of the show is, Ignorance Was Bliss. That's actually the name of Kate's podcast. It's a really cool show. And so I'm super stoked to have Kate here with us tonight. But before I bring her in from the virtual green room, we do have to say thank you to our sponsor, Vital Signs and Graphics, who handles all the design graphic print area for the greater West Michigan area. If you're looking for logos and designs, they're the folks you need to pay attention to. In fact, here's a video from our sponsor. Since 1982, Vital Signs and Graphics has been helping professionals with all their image, logo, and design needs. Perhaps you're looking for signs and banners, truck and trailer lettering, business cards, brochures, or other image and marketing aids. Vital Signs and Graphics in-house design studio has you covered. From logos to apparel, start to finish, Vital Signs and Graphics has everything you need to look and feel professional. Call Rick at 231-652-3300. He'll get you noticed. All right, and that's our sponsor, Vital Signs and Graphics. So thank you to those guys for helping us out. Now let's bring in from the virtual green room. Let's bring in our guest, Kate Wallinga. Hi, Kate.
Hello. How are you?
I am dandy. All right, so thank you so much for being here tonight, setting aside a little bit of your Friday evening to have a chat with us here and share your story.
Yeah, it's you say that as though I would have anything else to do on a Friday night, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's half the fun of, in my opinion, of doing podcasting is you have an opportunity not to just talk with other people, but to talk with other podcasters and hear about what they do and how they're doing it. And so we'll get to your show in a few minutes. But what I'd like to do right now, and the way we do things here on Focused on Forward, is I'm going to turn the microphone over to you for a few minutes and let you tell your story about your back injury. And I'll jump in with some questions every now and then.
Sure. I mean, it was a challenge for me to decide, like, which exactly of the catastrophes of my life should we focus on? But, the back injury is a pretty clear and obvious one. I have a chronic health condition. It's called ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disorder.
Okay.
Effectively, my body believes that I need a second spine. And so the colloquial name for it is called bamboo spine, because that's kind of what it looks like. It's a sheath of bone that grows from the tailbone up and fuses all of your vertebrae. Not fun. Don't recommend it. And over time, you lose flexibility. You lose your ability to move around very easily, and it's pretty painful. And that sheath of bone is very, very brittle. It's very easy to break. And that's what happened to me, is that I'd started the ankylosing process, and I was on a kid's playground. I have a lot of kids, so, and I was, sort of not really quite paying attention, and all I did was step wrong. I didn't fall down or jar into anything. I just stepped wrong, but it was with enough force that it broke not one of the vertebrae, but the connecting ankylosed part of the
Okay.
spine. But that's, as I said, it's very brittle, and so it just snapped and shattered. Not real fun, and it's very dangerous because now you've got this super sharp shards of bone that are right next to your spinal column. You know, not safe in many ways. And
Yeah.
so that was in 2014, and it was frustrating. She says, as an understatement, it was frustrating because I had a major health incident in 2010, and that one left me on home health care for a full year. And so I had only just gotten back to work in late 2011 or
Okay.
so. And I was only starting to feel like I was hitting my stride again. We bought a house and I felt settled in. And then this. And I actually, so I went to the ER and was seen that way. And they were like, there's really not a whole lot we can do. I was in an immobilizer for a couple of days, a
Mm-hmm.
couple of weeks, I guess. But there's really not a whole lot they can do. There was not a surgery that they could safely do. And they determined that there were no shards of bone that were actively threatening my spinal column. So they were like, just don't do that again. I was like, thanks, doc.
Yeah, I won't walk. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, cool. So I never lost my ability to walk. I never lost sensation in my
Okay.
extremities or that kind of thing. So in that case, I guess I was lucky.
Yeah.
But it hurt a whole lot, a really super lot. And I tried to go back to work maybe a month later or so. And I made it about a day and a half, maybe 2 days. And I went into where I was working at a job that was I did crisis work. And so I was going into emergency rooms or people's homes if they were saying that they had suicidal or homicidal thoughts, or if they were having a psychotic break, that kind of thing. And I was helping assess, can they safely go home again, or do they need to go into a psych hospital? So that's a lot of walking around. It's a lot of unfamiliar terrain, that sort of deal. And so I made it about a day and a half, and I went into the ER where I was working, and I finished seeing a client. And I went out to the nurse's station and I sat down and I just burst into tears. And I mean, I'm not a crier by any means. And I was just done. I couldn't function around the pain. And this is, as a chronic pain condition, I was like, oh, no big deal. I just hurt a little more than usual. It's fine. But no, it was not fine. And so I went home that day, and the next morning I went in and I met with my bosses and I was like, I'm done. I'm going on short-term disability, and never went back. So I've been on disability since 2014.
Okay. So what was now you mentioned that you're used to chronic pain, and a couple of other people that I've talked to have had chronic pain issues. Like you said, it's something where they get used to a certain level of pain and they just deal with it, and it becomes part of their daily life, what they do, how they do, when they do. Describe the difference, if you don't mind, the difference between your chronic daily pain and what this was. I mean, like, it's hard to say, hey, give us a percentage difference, but something where we can kind of measure it to know what difference of level we're talking about.
I mean, the baseline pain, it was what I have a lot of bone spurs and nerve damage. And so there's it's often sharp pain and sort of a grinding ache, I would describe.
Okay.
And one of the diagnostic criteria sort of ankylosing spondylitis is that your first hour of the day is miserable. You wake up and that first hour is just like literally can't get out of bed kind of
Okay.
pain. It's not really clear to me exactly what that's about. It's somewhat that you don't move much during sleep. You get kind of you hold still and you get heavier into the mattress, or you may maintain the same position. Because one of the things that helps the most for me is to be able to change whatever I'm doing. So to move around or to get up and walk around a little bit. Like I can't stand, I can't walk, I can't sit, I can't lie down for long periods of time. I have to change it up.
Okay.
Right. And so first thing in the day, that first hour, not good. And then I'll take my morning meds, and through the day, it gets better. It gets more manageable. And then at the end of the day, I'll get sort of a fatigue and soreness from like a mechanical pain. You know,
Okay.
like people are used to if you've ever, pulled a muscle or,
Sure.
broken a bone, that kind of mechanical style pain that people are more familiar with, that happens by the end of the day. And so that was my norm. When I broke my back, it was that plus these random moments of screaming, stabbing misery. Just,
Okay.
yeah, it's like it's not as fun as sexy as people seem to think it would be. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. So it was just I thought I could push through because I thought I had these coping mechanisms for dealing with chronic pain. This was when I was home, it was just a little more than usual. And I hadn't realized how many more breaks I was taking and how much more downtime I had.
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
at work, you can't do that.
No. Yeah, they expect you to push through. So, all right. So let's talk about the mental emotional side of this. Now, you said that when this happened, you had already had one health incident a few years prior. You were just kind of getting back up to speed for yourself. So, what was the initial mental emotional, weight?
It was real bad. I uh, you know, I often I think the mental emotional side of dealing with chronic pain and dealing with injuries is worse than the physical, because the physical has sort of a visible aspect to it. You're visibly, either you have an injury that people can see, or you're limping or something. They can look at, you're wincing when it hurts. When you're hurting mentally, people don't know. Like, I'm real good at poker face. And, as has already been demonstrated, I tend toward dark humor when I'm, just at baseline. So,
Understood.
I felt like I had crawled back. Like I coded several times in 2010. I literally died several times. And
Oh my.
so,
Okay.
To feel like I had crawled back from death, from the, being in the ICU and them telling my husband to start planning the funeral, and feeling like I had come back from that, and I had gone back to work full time, and I was really sort of proud of that. And I loved my job. Like, I felt useful and I felt competent and smart again. And now that was all being taken away from me again. And I have 4 children. At the time, we had 3. My 4th is adopted.
Okay.
So she came along after that. But I felt like I needed to show these kids that, it's not that mom can do anything, but that it's okay to try. And now I have to show them that it's also okay to fail. And that's rough. And I was pretty sure I was not going to be able to rebound, because I think everybody has a certain number of sort of bounces that your rubber ball gets in life. And I was pretty sure I wasn't going to rebound enough to go back to work. And it turns out I have not been. That I've had another break since then. And
Oh, okay.
it's just, this is what it's going to be, is that it's very brittle, and I'm going to have random moments of excruciating pain, and I can't make a workplace be dependent on me when I don't know
Right.
from day to day. And so I went into a very dark headspace. And depression, people think of depression as being sad.
Right.
I would have given any amount of money, time, inappropriate behavior, whatever it took to feel sad. I would have loved that. Depression for me is feeling nothing. It's numb, and it's dark, and it's an inability to see into the future. Like I used to think about my horizon would pull very close to my face, and I couldn't see into next year or next month, or sometimes my husband would ask me what I would like for dinner, and I couldn't think that far ahead. It just, everything becomes distanced and difficult to connect with. And I had this is another thing that I had gone through in 2010 and crawled out of. And so I recognized what was happening. And the fun extra thing for me, I have a lot of this. Medically, I am a mess, is that I have epilepsy. And so having epilepsy means you can't take a lot of antidepressants.
Right.
Because they lower your seizure threshold. And I've had some seizures on antidepressants, so I can't take antidepressants safely. So that meant I'm going to have to white knuckle it through this. And I don't do that especially gracefully. And so it was a lot of, I think I went to, I literally stopped at Target on my way home from telling my bosses that I was going on short-term disability. And I bought a bunch of like sweatpants and, pandemic gear, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
And, but I bought that back, before it was cool, because I'm a hipster that way. And, and so, I bought all these clothes, and I effectively didn't get out of bed for months. And then when I did, it was to sort of sit on the couch and not really interact. And I felt like the whole world was moving around me, but that I wasn't really engaging in it.
Okay.
I felt very lost, and I felt very broken, and that brings this whole pile of other issues. You don't feel interesting, you don't feel smart, you don't feel attractive, you don't feel compelling. Like all of these things that you want to be able to feel, I lost all of that. Mm-hmm. And so I went into a pretty dark place for a pretty long time.
Okay. Yeah, I think sometimes people have a misconception over what depression is and what depression isn't. Because I think a lot of times in the way Hollywood portrays it is that, like you said, oh, we're just sad. I'm unhappy about something. And that can be part of depression, truthfully and clearly. But there are, hate to use a Shrek reference here, but depression has layers. It's like an onion. Onions have layers. Depression has layers, and there's different layers to which people go to with depression, and so it's not a one size fits all. And I think I always want to make sure that people understand that there is this kind of like a disclaimer almost when it comes to discussions about depression, and that it's not just this one thing and this one thing only. So, okay. So it had a pretty adverse effect on you, clearly. So how did you work on moving past some of these things? Because clearly these aren't things that you can put in your rearview mirror and walk away from. These are things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, things that you're going to have to, you said you have some children at home, and you said you wanted to be able to show them how to work through these things. So how did you decide that you were going to white knuckle, to use your expression, to white knuckle through some of these things?
Some of it was not, you don't have a choice, I feel like, with kids, is that they don't need to see mom happy all the time. They don't need to see mom healthy all the time. It's okay for them to see you fall down. They have to see you try to get up again. Mm-hmm. They have to see you say that it's okay to fail, because they're gonna, right? And so I didn't feel like there was any pressure to be perfect, but I did feel like there was a pressure to show my kids that you try, at least. And that often it's easier for me to say, to myself, or sometimes out loud, I can't do a thing. Try anyway, and get up and take that first step anyway, because I can always go back to bed. I can always get downstairs and start breakfast and realize I can't do this today. This is beyond me. I'm going to go back to bed, and that's okay. That's not a failure. That's having tried and learned a thing. And that's what so when my kids say, I'm sick, I don't want to go to school today, it's okay. That's fine. Get up and try. And if you still feel gross in 10 minutes, then you can go back to bed. Mm-hmm. But try. That helped. It's a whole story that I guarantee we don't have time for, but the adoption for my fourth kid was
Mhm.
not planned at all. She is the only of my children that was not intended, but she was a surprise, and she came from a trauma background. We
Okay.
we were acquainted with her biological mother, and just after the baby turned 2, the mother kind of fell apart.
Oh,
And
okay.
initially, it was a matter of stay here for a little while, and we'll help you get on your feet again. And after a couple of months, I realized you are never going to get on your feet again. And because of choices that she was making in our lives, I'm being really diplomatic here.
Fair enough.
Because of choices that she was making in her ways of making money and so on, we invited her to move out. And
Oh,
we
gotcha.
told her,
Okay.
you can leave the baby with us and we'll take care of her while you get set up somewhere, or you can take the baby with you, but you can't stay. And she said, it'll be easier for me to get an apartment and that kind of thing without the kid, so I'll leave her here. Okay. Like we can handle that. And 2 weeks
Sure.
later she called and said, I'm never going to get better. You keep her.
Oh
And
my.
we've never
Okay.
seen her again. So I had to be okay for that. I had to be okay. You go to court a lot for any sort of, family court for adoption and for dealing with
Mhm.
guardianship and custody issues.
Mhm.
And the child, having come from a trauma background, had a lot of psychiatric and medical needs that we had to help deal with and that sort of thing. So it's sort of, you don't have a choice. You have to get up, you have to do the thing. And that was actually really helpful for me. Like, I think sometimes when people are looking at somebody who is hurt or sick, they're like, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to give you too
Mhm.
much. And my answer to that is, don't make that decision for me. I will tell you if I can't handle something on a given day. And I
Mhm.
know myself pretty well, but you're not being nice to me. You're being, frankly, a little condescending if
Mhm.
you decide that I can't handle a
Right.
thing, because I'm actually pretty competent. And you know what? It feels so strong and important and good when I do accomplish a thing. So let me try, and I'll say no if I can't do it. And so that was sort of 2015 was that year, getting through the adoption process. And then after you kind of get in the habit of functioning better
Mhm.
here and there. So I still have my down days. I still have my down weeks, down months, depending on circumstances that are going on. I'm not as resilient as I used to be, either physically or mentally. And there are certain times of year that I just really, really struggle.
Mhm.
But my kids are all older now. My oldest is 21 and my youngest is 8. And so they're pretty resilient. They're pretty high functional themselves. And so that helps a lot. And I look at them and I'm like, okay, they're like, I love them because you have to. That's the rule. But I like them. Like, they're
Yeah.
likable human beings. So cool, I'm doing something right. That's good.
Yeah, my wife and I are always impressed that we still, we love our children as well, and we like them. And we keep saying, our oldest is 22. He'll be 23 in February, and we keep saying, how did he turn out to be an okay kid? Because we're both like, I'm like, I know my personality, and and she knows hers, and we're like, in the two of us combined. You're like, how did this happen? So I always that just reminds me of conversations that my wife and I have about our children. We're like, they're these guys aren't so bad. We actually kind of like them too.
Kind of, and so for a long time for me, it was just, I say just like it's minimal. It's not minimizing. It's just the thing that I focused on was either being a parent or being very clear with my husband about when I couldn't be a
Hmm.
parent. And that was it. I was either focusing on my own health or on my kids, and that was it. Um, by 2017, I was sort of hitting my stride there. Plus, the kids were getting older and more functional. As long as they can operate the microwave and the TV, they don't really care if mom's having a bad day, so that's fine.
Right.
And at the end of 2017, my father had a mental health crisis of his own and needed a place to live. Had a contentious divorce happen all at once. And
Okay.
so, of course, his option was homeless shelter or us. That was it. Those were his only.
Oh my. Okay.
And so, of course, we said, yes, you can come stay here. And a month later, I sat my husband down and said, I'm either going to go to jail or I'm going to start a podcast. You choose. And so I have a podcast.
There you go. And there it is.
But I needed something. I had lost myself. I was always either somebody's daughter, because my father just had, understand, like, I get it. I don't want to sound like I'm blaming who he was, and he has since passed, but that he had very high needs, both medically and mentally.
Okay.
And so he would literally follow me through the house like a baby duckling all day when I was used to having alone time, where I could sort of lie down and effectively not function and allow myself to have a bad day with my back or whatever, and then get up when the kids got home from school. Now I can't do that because my father would literally come in my room and stand in the doorway and talk at me. And I would be like, oh,
yeah, that's a lot.
So but as well, I needed something where I'm not somebody's daughter. I'm not somebody's mother. I'm not somebody's wife. I needed to find my own personality again. And so I sat my husband down, like I said, right around New Year's of 2018, said, I'm going to start a podcast. And my first episode came out approximately February 1st of 2018.
Okay. Now, was that Ignorance Was Bliss? Is that how
Yes.
Ignorance Was Bliss was started? All right. So before we get a little more into that story, I want to make sure so we've talked about how you've started focusing on moving forward. Is there any one thing that you do on a day-to-day basis that helps you?
Well, the podcast is that is the thing. Okay. Without describing what the podcast is, just the fact that I had a project, that I had a thing that allowed me to tap into some creativity and to feel productive again.
Okay.
And to remind myself that I have a voice and I have some worth and some things to say. That you lose that really easily when you're recovering from a major physical or mental trauma. And so having this, I had the kids for a while, but they didn't need me as much. And I've never been a helicopter parent to begin with. And I also didn't want to be one of those, I'm thinking of a lot of specific people right now. You know who you are. I didn't want to be one of those people who was like, oh my God, my kids are growing up. What do I do? I was like, oh, thank God they're growing up. Whew, go away. In the nicest, most loving way, but please.
Sure.
Shoo. And so I needed to feel like I had something to fill that space so that I didn't end up with that like empty nest feeling.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me. All right. So let's start talking about your podcast then. And how.
Always a fan.
Always a fan. I love talking about podcasts. Even if it's not my podcast, I love hearing about other people's shows and what they do and how they're doing it. So this is one of my favorite parts about having a podcast, is that I get to talk with other podcasters about what they're doing and how the show came to be and all that. So let's go down to brass tacks of Ignorance Was Bliss. How did you come up with the concept, or what is the concept of the show?
Well, it has changed. So it started off, I'm a forensic psychologist by training. And so I listened to a lot of true crime, sort of a busman's holiday kind of idea. Like, this was stuff that was familiar to me and I just was used to it, but I kept hearing the same questions be asked over and over of, what does it mean to have schizophrenia? Or what does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity? Or why would the jury have done this? Whatever. And every time I'd be like, oh, ask me, I know. And they wouldn't, because I was listening to the show 6 months after it had been recorded. sitting alone on my couch.
Sure.
So they didn't ask me. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start my own podcast, and it'll be a true crime show, but sort of more explaining the psychology of it, what forensic psychology is, and how to understand the criminal justice system. Like the stuff I already knew, basically. I figured I'd already done the schooling for it, so I might as well just use that instead of actually doing, research.
Right.
And so that's where it started. And I stayed as pretty consistently true crime for maybe 6 months. And after a while, I realized I wanted to talk to all of these other creators that were out there as well, that were not, I would be like, do you want to come on my show? And they would go, no. No, because they didn't know true crime. They didn't like true crime, or whatever the case was. And I was like, you know what? That's fair. I don't have to be true crime. I'll talk to anybody about anything. And so I started branching out, and just now I literally, I never know. I know who I'm going to talk to next, but I don't know what we're going to talk about. We don't plan that most of the time. It's just sort of a conversation, and we're going to see where it goes, and we follow rabbit holes, and it just sort of unrolls organically rather than being plotted out. Once in a while, somebody will prefer to say, like, I want to talk about this book I've written, or this case that fascinates me. And I've had a couple of people who have even written scripts for my show, which I find adorable. And I can do that. That's fine. But for the most part, it's extemporaneous. It's just conversation.
Okay. Well, that, in my opinion, that actually makes your show even cooler. So some of the episodes that I've listened to, it actually, the episodes kind of make a little more sense now. Knowing that, not that they weren't making sense before. That probably sounded horrible.
They probably weren't. I entirely believe that.
No, it was actually a very logical conversation, in the way, because we had talked pre-show that I had today. In fact, I listened to your most recent episode with Megan from Crit Show, and how you guys had flowed from talking about RPG games at one moment, and then the next part of the conversation where you guys were talking about mental health and depression and all these things. And it was kind of interesting to me. I was like, well, that was kind of an interesting change. And I didn't know. So now, knowing this now, that it's extemporaneous and that you guys just kind of do it off the cuff and you're talking about it, to me, that's even more fun. And not that, I mean, I don't have a script for this show. Most of what we're talking about is, I mean, we have a basic idea of what we wanted to talk about, but that's about as much as I ever do with this, is because I want our conversation to be authentic. I want our conversation to be natural, and for people to hear what you're thinking, and to people to hear what I'm thinking, not what I wrote down 4 hours ago, so, but yeah, so that also explains how, the change in your show, how you went from one, because, so, and I'll say this now, because again, this is something I said in the pre-show. One of the things I love about Ignorance Was Bliss is the fact that you have people from all walks. It's not just one set, I'm going to only talk to authors, or I'm only talking to, true crime people, or I'm only talking to, junior pet detective people over here, or whatever it is. You talk to a little bit of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about your show in a little bit more in depth. When you're going through a topic, and you said, like you said, it's all extemporaneous. What are some of the things? Are there topics that you try to avoid, or do you hit the gamut?
For me, no. I don't have any rule outs. I have, housekeeping that I do when I first connect with somebody. So what I do basically is, sometimes I reach out to people. Other times people will reach out to me and say they want to come on. Either way, we set a time to record, and I tell them to expect about 90 minutes. And I hear you, Laura, laughing at me right now. Laura is one of my mods who just pointed out that I can't have a conversation that's less than 3 hours long, and she's kind of right. But I tell them expect 90 minutes as a low ball anyway, because for half an hour there's housekeeping, and I want to understand how they speak. I want them to understand how I speak, so that we're not talking over each other a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I want to explain what my show is, because I don't expect everybody who comes on my show to have listened to my show. So I want to give them a little bit of a vibe that, look, I show them that every recording that I do, it's not an interview, it's just a conversation. I show them that I start with a blank piece of paper in front of me, and we just go from there. We just see what happens. And one of the questions I ask is, are there any topics that are off limits for you?
Okay.
Because it sounds scattered. Some of my episodes sound like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We just go. But the reality is I kind of know what I'm doing. I spent a lot of time in school, so it's good that I learned things. And so I can kind of tell if a conversation is moving in a direction that the person is not comfortable with, or has said,
Sure.
I don't want to talk about the pandemic. I don't want to talk about crime. I don't want to, whatever. If that's the case, I can kind of nudge it back in the other direction. So each individual guest may have boundaries they set on it. But for me, I mean, I've talked to authors and actors and podcasters. I've talked to one memorable gentleman who called me from a contraband cell phone from within a maximum security prison cell.
Oh, wow.
So, it's sort of, I'll talk to anybody.
That had to be an interesting show. I hadn't come across that episode yet.
There's a lot. I worry, honestly, about the people who have heard all of my episodes. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
If I'm not mistaken, you're a couple hundred in, aren't you?
321.
Yeah, like I said, a couple hundred. So yeah. Okay. Wow. So how often do you put out an episode then?
I aim for 2 or 3 a week.
Oh, okay.
Because my favorite thing is the talking to people, was getting to know people, making the connections. That's, because I've been in disability since 2014, right? And so I live a fairly isolated lifestyle. And so being able to connect with somebody and talk and learn their story, collect stories, that's my best thing. But in order to be able to do that, I have to keep the output going.
Sure.
If I'm going to pull stories in, I have to push stories out at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can appreciate that. So I work from home, and for the most part, I come into the shop here a couple days a week with my dad and help him out and on some things. But I used to be an on the road salesman. I was used to being in front of people and talking with people and doing all these things. And when you don't have that, there's a bit of a disconnect from people and interactions with people, and you kind of there's a wantingness of having that. And then with everything my daughter went through with 2019, we were stuck in a hospital for almost 100 days. And then the rest of the year, we were kind of just laying low because she was still recovering. And then 2020 came along with, hello, COVID. And with her autoimmune issue, we had to stay home as well. And so, yeah, so for me, this has been, that ability to reach out and touch someone and have a story with somebody, have a connection with someone. For me, this has been a very important part of my mental stability is being able to talk to other people. And I love being able to share in stories with people, just like you. I love the fact that that's one of the things you appreciate, because it's kind of, a little bit of a kindred spirit feeling, is that I love hearing people's stories. And it's not just the fact that they've gone through things. Everybody goes through something in their own way and at their own pace. But I love hearing stories of triumph and how people have overcome something and how they've beat something. And this is, I'm owning this, I'm moving forward. This is how I'm doing it. And so for me, that's kind of one of the big reasons why I got into doing what I do. But
yeah, for me, I am less about the moral of the story is, you're talking about triumph in the end. I'm willing to talk to people who are still in the thick of it, or
sure, yeah,
the number of people who tell me I don't have a story to tell, I'm boring, I don't know what we would talk about, and I'm like, okay, you just waved a red flag at a bull, because I guarantee you got
I'll
a story.
pull one out.
And that's the thing, is you don't tell a psychologist you got nothing to say. Like, come on. So And that's, some of my topics are about third person stories. I've had a couple of people on who want to come and guest, or who I want to. I'm not above begging. And so there are some people where I'm like, I just want to work with you. I don't care what we do, anything. We could read little golden books. That's just anything. And
Right.
so those are the ones that are more likely to be, if not scripted, then at least structured.
Sure.
And I'll kind of whatever it takes to make the other person comfortable, because it's just the best.
Okay. I'm good with that. All right. So with 321, did you say, or 324?
321.
321. So with 321 episodes under your belt, you've clearly had opportunity to kind of figure out what you're doing, how you're doing it, and kind of have your own system and methods in place. But one of the things I like to ask people who do what we do is a question that's kind of asking you to pick which child is your favorite.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Do you have an episode that maybe maybe not necessarily your favorite, but one that stands out that you go, if I tell people about my show, this is the one I say, hey, you might want to check this one out?
Literally never going to happen.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that, like, I've had some famous people on, bigger names, whatever you want to say. I hate that, but
sure.
People who are well known for one reason or another. I've also had people with a listenership of 0 who you've never heard of before. I have had, like I said, a range of topics, whatever. So if people ask me what episode should I start with, I try to get a sense of, well, what are you into? What do you like to hear about? Because I'm trying to think of an example. So for instance, 2 years ago, so 2019, I was, I had the chance to talk to Skye Borgman, who is the director of Abducted in Plain Sight, which is a documentary on Netflix. Yeah. And she's lovely and kept it very topical, very well behaved. It was lovely. And I actually released that episode from the hospital myself because I had pneumonia at the time. So, these are the things podcasters do, right?
Free time to edit, might as well.
Right? Well, seriously, if you listen to so what I do is I record the conversation as it is. Like, there's not a, hey, welcome to Ignorance Was Bliss, and today I'm talking to so-and-so. I have them introduce themselves, and then later I do an intro and an outro for each episode, because I don't know what we're going to talk about, so I can't introduce the episode yet. And so you can hear, if you listen to that episode, you can hear the beeping of my oxygen monitor or my heart monitor in the background. I'm like, yeah, this is on brand. But it was a good conversation, and it was interesting to me. It was interesting to her, as far as she said, anyway. And I didn't get a lot of comment from listeners, which is fine. They do or they don't, and that's up to them.
Right.
Then, by comparison, about 3 months ago or so, a friend of mine who does not have a podcast came on. And I didn't know what we were going to talk about. It was sort of on a bet a little bit that he came on my show. And within a couple of minutes, he mentions very offhandedly that he had been diagnosed with autism as an adult. What that was like, and how did he know, and what was his experience. And it ended up being this really compelling conversation. And I've gotten half a dozen or more emails and DMs from people like, that episode really meant a lot to me. I've had people tell me that they've called their doctor because of that episode.
Oh, wow.
Or that, right? Like big, like I get chills when I think about it. Cause like, that's
cool.
That's real life stuff. And so, how do you weigh those two? One may have got more downloads than the other, but they're both important in their way.
They both impact in different ways.
And so just because it's not my favorite, any given episode might not be my favorite. I can think of a couple that I really hated, really did. That doesn't mean that somebody else out there won't benefit from it.
Right. Yeah. I even, I'm, let's see, 52 episodes in on this, and I release once a week. But, I have a couple where I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have put that one out. But one of the ones where I thought I shouldn't have put it out, I've actually gotten messages back from people saying, "Oh, hey, thanks for sharing that." I don't have the exact same story, but there was a lot of similarities, and so it was nice to hear somebody tell something of my story.
Mhm.
And so even though it may not, like you just said, may not be my personal favorite, but if it affects somebody else, that's why I do this. I'm hoping that somebody will gain impact. If I can help one person an episode, I'm thrilled.
Mhm.
So okay. So all right. Let's talk about the where you're going with your podcast from here. What do you have upcoming? Do you
Those are hard questions.
I know, and I know
I
you
have
you even said ahead of time that was going to be a hard question, but I was
it
throwing it out
is,
there anyway.
but I wrote it down. So I actually I'm sitting. I have an actual studio now that I'm in, that's sound
Mm-hmm.
treated and that kind of thing, which is pretty cool. This is the result of 2020. My husband is a college professor, and so we had our basement remodeled because until then he was sharing not just my office but my desk. And so we decided that for the sake of our 20-year marriage, we would have the basement redone. And so
Fair enough.
that's my space now. But so I went through about 4 months last year where I didn't record any new conversations. I was just chipping away at my backlog, and I ran out right around the first of the year. I had nothing, and it was panicking. Like I had no backup. And so I overcorrected because I am want to do that on the regular in many, many ways. And so now again, I've overdone a little bit, and I have a lot of backup. Plus, I didn't react real well to the first COVID vaccine, so I stopped scheduling at that time. So I stopped scheduling in mid-March, and I hadn't had anything for April.
Okay.
Haven't had anything for May, although I keep recording anyway because somebody be like, "Can I come on your show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got nothing planned." And then I'm like, I talked to myself about this, but so I don't have a whole lot on the docket coming up in terms of who I am recording with, but I can throw out some names of people that I have in my backlog that are coming out soon.
Okay, cool.
This coming week is the 41st? It's the anniversary. I don't know numberth, but the anniversary of the Mount St. Helens explosion.
Yeah, I think
eruption.
It's right around there. Yeah.
It's May 18th is the anniversary, and so this coming week I have a crossover with Cutting Class, which stays quite on topic. We're not exactly scripted or well behaved, but it stays on topic about the Mount St. Helens eruption. So I'm looking forward to that. One of my favorite things is to sort of scoop up new podcasters that I catch somewhere and be like, "Oh, come talk on my show quick before somebody else catches you," because I wanna get the fresh new little podlers who haven't grown up.
The podlers.
Yeah.
I love it.
I take credit. I'm proud of that word.
You should.
I was typed up in CBC online for that word. So podlers, yes,
that's awesome.
But so one was Doomsday podcast, which is about natural and man-made disasters that were not handled especially well, and what to do if you find yourself in those situations.
Interesting.
I have recently recorded with the host of Autopsy, which is pretty much what you'd think it's about.
Sure.
Tara from Three Spooked Girls, Appalachian Mysteria, which is a true crime out of West Virginia. I've also talked to an actor named Brian Feldudo, who was in School of Rock.
Okay.
Amber Hunt, who did Accused and now Crimes of the Centuries. So many. Like I have 15 or 20 that are stacked up and ready to go. And it's just
all right.
It's just the best. It's just a mix, all of them. I feel like several of mine upcoming are sort of crimey in nature, which I sort of go in waves where sometimes I'll go a month and a half with no crime at all. And then other times I'm like, okay, which murder are we going to talk about today?
Fair enough. Okay. So I want to ask you two questions. And these are the same two questions I ask every single guest who's ever been on my show, except for one. One person snuck through, and I still don't know how it happened. But Terry, you know who I'm talking about. It is you. Anyway, no, I love Terry. She came on my show. She had a phenomenal story, but somehow I forgot to ask her these questions. The first question is, Looking over the entirety of your journey through life, what is the greatest lesson that you have learned?
Not to regret. That regret, like there are things that I've lived through
Mm-hmm.
that were pretty miserable at the time. I didn't enjoy breaking my back. I didn't enjoy dying in childbirth. I didn't enjoy the loss of my father. I didn't enjoy, like, I've had some big bad stuff have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a very firm believer in the butterfly effect.
Okay.
And that if you change one thing, you might change everything. And
All right.
so that's a really strong lesson to me, is where I am right now is pretty good. It's okay. And if I had changed any of these things in my past, I wouldn't be exactly here the way it is.
All right. Yeah, you wouldn't be Kate.
True.
Yeah, you'd be a different version. Okay, I can respect that. The second question is pretty similar to the first in its nature. Looking back over the course of your journey, what was the best piece of advice that you were given that you still use?
Oh God, I don't know. I don't listen to people very much. No, I do. I don't know. I, um, I don't really think about advice in snippet form. Um, More, I tend to absorb stories and
Mm-hmm.
advice, and it happens then, like now, where I can't attribute where I learned a thing or how I learned a thing. I think one of the best pieces of advice I learned, when I was going to school, for instance, for studying psychology, was that whole thing that they say about don't go to bed angry. Yeah, no, just get your sleep. It's okay to go to bed mad and deal with it tomorrow. That
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. Like, so by and large, a lot of those sorts of maxims of, let me word it this way. I don't use the word should, and I don't use the word just, because those are bad words. I'll
Okay.
say other words. All that, I've worked in a prison. I'll say any word you want me to say, and that's fine. That, like the big bad words, the FCC words that
Yeah.
that are regulated over the airways. Those don't bother me, but it bothers me when I hear someone should all over themselves. I should have done this. I should have done that. I should be like this. I should think that way. I don't like that.
Okay.
And I don't like just, because just is minimizing and it's devaluing somebody. So
Okay.
I think those are the sorts of things that, I don't speak in absolutes very often, but I don't like those words.
All right. I can appreciate that. The reason I ask those questions is I like to hear people's different responses, of course, and it always kind of ties into their story, and it also helps kind of round out their personality for me and help me understand who they are and what they are, and oftentimes I tell my guest the greatest piece of advice that I ever got. I can attribute it back to somebody. His name was Tim Bland. He came through when I was about 16 years old. I was in a really rough spot in my life, and I felt bad because I had done a bunch of really dumb things, as a teenager.
16. Yeah.
I was young and dumb. 16-year-old boy, but I had felt really bad about some of these things. And when you're 16, you do see things in absolutes, and you have this very long tunnel vision that there's no gray area. It's black or it's white, and this is the way it is. You haven't learned to appreciate the gray areas of life yet. And one of the things he told me was, it doesn't matter that you fell. It matters that you get back up. And so that's the reason. That's why I ask what people's best piece of advice is that they've gotten, because I'm 44 years old. That piece of advice has been in my life for 28 years, and for 28 years I've repeated that more times than I can probably shake a stick at. Because when I'm talking to my own kids, or I'm talking to somebody else, or somebody that's going through a rough spot in life, hey, it doesn't matter that you fell. We're all imperfect. We're all going to make mistakes. It's how we rebound, that we allow ourselves to rebound. and do the best we can at it. Nobody's expecting us to be perfect. So anyway, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I do that. Okay. So we've talked about your story with your back. We've talked about how that led into podcasting. We've talked about how cool Ignorance Was Bliss actually is and why everybody should be subscribing to it. Because I do, and I think it's really cool. And I think that, I'm hoping my listeners will go give your show a listen, because I really honestly enjoy your show very much. I love the twists and turns of the conversation. And now knowing, like we said earlier, knowing that it's extemporaneous even makes it a better thing for me. But where can people find you? And again, remind them how often or what days you release episodes, so they know where to find you and when to find you.
What days? Whenever I have a couple hours of free time is when I come down and release an episode. So,
Okay, fair enough.
I don't have release dates. And I decided, because that is a piece of advice that I sort of gave myself, I guess, as a podcaster, was this has to remain more fun than stress.
Sure.
And that means I don't do well with deadlines. They stress me out. And so some weeks I have 3-4 episodes. Some weeks I'll go dark for an entire week or two, depending on where my physical health is at and my mental health is at. And I have to be okay with that. But I'm at iwbpodcast.com, and all of the social media is IWB Podcast. I have a Facebook group, which is fantastic. It is just as irreverent and random, but also it's a solid, safe space, a supportive space. It's called The Asylum, both because we're all a little off in there, but also because it's a safe space. It's literally my favorite place on the internet.
Awesome.
So I'm online all the time.
All right. Excellent. Well, guys, make sure that you go and you check out Kate and you check out Ignorance Was Bliss. I guarantee that it's something that there's something there for everyone. I will guarantee that. There, you don't have to like just true crime. You don't have to like, movies, talk about movies or books or whatever. There's literally, with 320 some odd episodes in there, there's something for everybody. So go check it out at iwbpodcast.com. All right, guys, that was our show for tonight. I want to say thank you to Kate for coming on. Thank you for being here and putting up with me and chatting with me. I really enjoyed having you here tonight. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching and listening to Focused on Forward. Well, that concludes another episode of Focused on Forward. To be a guest of Focused on Forward, you can reach us through Twitter at podcastfof, through our Facebook page named Focused on Forward, or through email focusedonforward@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing each and every one of your stories that has yet to be told. So until then, be safe, be kind, and be loving to one another as you stay focused on forward.